Right, so a happy new year to you all. First and foremost, I hope it will be a great one for yourself despite the many obstacles we face. But take comfort today in the fact that Israel's new year has gotten off to the worst of starts, thanks once again to Ansar Allah, the Houthis in Yemen, amid what has been a consistent escalation in attacks between the two states, but culminating in a New Year's Eve set of fireworks the Netanyahu regime never bargained for, with not one but two back-to-back attacks. The Houthis have been hitting Israel every night for the last almost 2 weeks straight. Every night people somewhere in Israel, be it Tel Aviv to the Nevatim Air Base, have been awoken to the sounds of the airstrike sirens and sent scrambling from their beds to bomb shelters. Whether the intention is to hit something or not, it's not so much a case of Sleepless in Seattle here, but more terminally tired in Tel Aviv. And despite the retaliation and threats sent the Houthis' way, they've continued into the new year as resilient and determined as ever to see Israel get out of Gaza. Right, so we do always expect some fireworks somewhere on New Year's Eve, don't we, as the new year is ushered in. But they aren't supposed to be this kind of firework, and certainly with nightly demonstrations such as those being put on by the Houthis in Yemen right now over the skies of Israel, whether Israel want them or not, is what they've got. Generally around 3 a.m. or so, the middle of the night, to cause maximum disturbance to the Israeli populace of whichever area happens to be affected that night, and indeed whether the rocket fired was brought down or not as well, because frankly if Israelis are getting disturbed, left tired, cranky, ineffectual through lack of sleep, well, that's an achievement in and of itself. By the 30th of December, the Houthis had launched 13 night strikes over 10 consecutive days and haven't let up since, even in the face of further attacks by Israeli allies, notably the US and the UK. And indeed, in light of all of the aforementioned attacks, yesterday came more such strikes. But as it's become increasingly obvious by the choice of targets the US and UK are choosing to strike, they haven't a clue where the Houthis actually are in order to strike them, and figure hitting civilian and government buildings in the Yemeni capital of Sana'a will do the job just as well. All this has really done, though, is turn more and more of the citizenship of Yemen, poor as they are, to the Houthis' side. Many of them on their side anyway, since this is a society who value religious righteousness and moral fortitude over capitalist and money-driven decision-making. Western media makes much of the fact that Yemen's people are poor and go without a lot, and they blame the Houthis for that, the control they claim is exerted over Yemen's government and society. The hypocrisy somehow escaping them that so many of the US and UK politicians ordering these nightly strikes have been bought and paid for by the Israel lobby for a long, long time now. Not the same thing in their minds, though, clearly. Simply put, though, Western capitalist thinking doesn't apply to the people of Yemen. They don't think the same way, and much of their support for the Houthis' actions appears to be pretty solid. Certainly the demonstrations that we've seen so many of bear that out. In that vein, though, perhaps these US and UK strikes serve to punish that support rather than hurt the Houthis in actuality. But if so, well, they're still missing the point, really, aren't they? On New Year's Eve, US and UK forces struck a Ministry of Defence complex and military administrative offices in Sana'a. US naval ships and aircraft also targeted what they claim were a Houthi control and command centre and advanced conventional weapon production and storage facilities, which included missiles and drones. This is according to a statement from the US Central Command, incidentally, CENTCOM. And I found this particularly interesting because we hear so much in our Western media about Iran supplying the Houthis, don't we? That they are Iran-backed after all, and yet here is CENTCOM claiming to have hit a Houthi production and storage facility. So are they getting supplied or are they building their own? Make your minds up. Could be a bit of both. But having looked into this, it seems the war with Saudi Arabia the Houthis were embroiled in from 2014, till the Saudis just got fed up with not getting anywhere and giving up, did interrupt Houthis' supply lines from Iran. It drove them to become more self-sufficient in the years since and researching their own weaponry. And despite the fact we saw very little of this early on when the Houthis first started attacking shipping in the Red Sea, mainly with dinghies and drones as they were back at the end of 2023, they had been researching their own ballistic weaponry from what they already had to hand, which mostly included old Soviet and North Korean Scud missiles. And in 2015, they actually established their own missile research force, the MRDC. They began by repurposing surface-to-air missiles into surface-to-surface missiles, and they ran with it from there, creating more than a dozen new types of homegrown ballistic missile, before finally becoming only the 5th nation on Earth to have developed their own hypersonic ballistic missile, the Palestine II, which they unveiled last year. So although Iranian tech almost certainly played a part, the explanation for why Yemen has so many of these supposed cutting-edge rockets is because they really are building them themselves. The long underestimated Houthis now no longer should be underestimated. So following all these attacks and knowing what the Houthis legitimately appear to be capable of themselves, despite all of those claims of being utterly Iran-backed in our media, what have they done in return to give Israel an even more miserable start to the new year then? Well, once more, Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv was targeted by one of those Palestine II ballistic missiles, whilst a power station near Jerusalem was targeted with another of their ballistics, called the Zulfikar. These were intercepted. However, the interceptions themselves still allowed both missiles, or the remnants of them, to crash to the ground nearby. These things were actually travelling so fast that despite actually being intercepted by Israel outside of Israeli territory by their Arrow long-range defence system, and despite being destroyed, the fragments, some of them pretty large still, kept going in exactly the same direction and still managed to reach Israel. Notably, one very large chunk fell near Jerusalem in a residential area of the settlement of Ramat Beit Shemesh. Cue more sirens, more delayed flights, more scrambling to the shelters in the Israeli capital and the occupied parts of Jerusalem overnight. But that wasn't all. Oh no! Why should Israel be the only ones getting a sleepless night after all? No, the US aircraft carrier the Harry S. Truman was once again targeted as well by the Yemeni naval force, which tickles me no end to read that in foreign media when Yemen do not actually have a navy. But they do have a naval force still, along with the missile force and drone force, who all coordinating an attack on the aircraft carrier. This allegedly preempted another attack on Yemen by the US as a load of drones and cruise missiles were fired at the Truman. The Cradle published part of the ensuing statement by Houthi spokesperson Yahya Saree, who said, "The Yemeni armed forces, with the help of Allah Almighty, have completed raising the combat readiness of several military units to confront any threats related to the Israeli and American enemy that aim to prevent Yemen from performing its religious, moral and humanitarian duty towards the Palestinian people," YAF spokesman Brigadier General Yahya Saree announced on Tuesday morning, highlighting that Yemen's military operations will not stop until the aggression on Gaza is stopped and the siege is lifted. These guys are not going to stop until Israel gets out of Gaza. It really is that plain, that simple. The US and the UK can make claims to have destroyed a facility of theirs, but more often than not, it is more civilian areas they are targeting. Not in my bloody name they're not, but that is what they're doing. But at the end of the day, the US has gone to war with the Houthis before. Saudi Arabia has too, as already mentioned. It's all come to no avail each time, because they don't quit, and they won't quit now. The fear, naturally, is that with Yemen having become Israel's primary focus at the moment in time, and an all-new escalation in the Middle East could kick off now, especially as the Houthis continue to become better and better armed and able to defend themselves. But with Israel and their Western-backed allies being the ones predominantly responsible for targeting civilian areas, and all in the defence of Israel being allowed to continue to commit genocide in Gaza, let's not forget, the Houthis will stop only if Israel leaves Gaza. That has always been their message. It remains their message. Any escalation, therefore, must be viewed through the prism of who is fighting for what reason here. Because one is fighting in solidarity with another Arab nation, and the other is fighting to defend the indefensible. These stories are never presented that way by our media, but it is exactly how we all need to be looking at this situation. For more on the sleeplessness being suffered by the residents of Tel Aviv and occupied Jerusalem and other areas besides, do check out this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe to ensure you don't miss out on new daily content and help support the channel whilst you're at it, because that is enormously appreciated each and every time. And I will hopefully catch you on the next video. Cheers, folks.